It was supposed to be just another late-night interview, the kind where celebrities drop hints, tell jokes, and maybe tease a future project. Nothing too serious. Nothing too raw. But what happened that night, under the studio lights of Seth Meyers' show, cracked open a secret so large, so personal, and so globally explosive that the studio itself went cold. The air changed. The audience stopped clapping. And Meghan Markle, seated off-camera in the wings, reportedly froze. Then, to the stunned disbelief of the crew and onlookers, visibly lost control of herself in a way no PR team could spin. The man responsible for detonating that moment? Joe Giuliano, the forgotten ex-fiancé of Meghan Markle. A man the world hadn't heard from in over a decade. A man whose name had been erased from Google faster than a scandalous tweet. And yet, there he was, smiling nervously, speaking slowly, but with the kind of conviction only a man with nothing left to lose could possess. In that surreal moment, with America watching live, Joe didn't drop a rumor. He dropped a reckoning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He claimed that Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex and former senior royal, had a fourth child. Not with Prince Harry, not even during her marriage, but before, in secret, with a man from Argentina. Not one child, but two. Twin boys. Hidden from the world. Forgotten, or perhaps deliberately erased. What happened next sent shockwaves across social media and news outlets alike. Videos of the alleged reaction, Meghan stumbling backward, whispering urgently into her phone, and reportedly rushing to a private dressing room in tears, began surfacing within minutes. The studio tried to contain the leak. NBC issued vague press statements. But it was too late. The dam had broken, and the world was already asking the only question that mattered. Was it true? To understand how we got to this moment, the unraveling of a story that once dazzled millions, we have to go back. Not just to the royal wedding, or to the Oprah interview. We have to rewind much further. To a time when Meghan Markle wasn't a duchess or a global icon. She was Rachel Zane on Suits, a rising actress navigating the Hollywood maze. And behind the closed doors of her personal life, she was allegedly grappling with something much more complicated. A past love she never wanted the world to know about, and children she may never have planned to reveal. Joe Giuliano was once described by those close to Meghan as the man she almost married. But he was more than that. He was, according to multiple sources, the keeper of secrets. The one person who knew the parts of Meghan's life she had meticulously worked to bury. When their relationship ended abruptly in the late 2000s, it left questions. Why the sudden silence? Why the wiped photos? Why the legal warning he allegedly received to never speak her name again? Joe remained quiet for over a decade. Until now, he appeared at the studio claiming to have proof. Proof that Meghan had traveled to South America during a time she told friends she was off the grid. Proof that she entered a private clinic in Cordoba, Argentina. And most shockingly, he claimed to have birth certificates. Altered, anonymous, and carefully filed. Pointing to the existence of twin boys born to a woman matching Meghan's description. What made this all the more chilling was not just the allegation itself, but the calculated silence that followed. For hours after the segment aired, no representative from Meghan's camp responded. Not even to deny. No furious tweet. No PR rebuttal. No legal team threatening lawsuits. Only a deafening, eerie silence that, to many, said more than words ever could. And then came the Whisper Network. Palace insiders allegedly began scrambling. British tabloids, long used to parsing every public appearance Meghan made, began re-evaluating timelines. Questions resurfaced about strange absences in her past, like her unexplained retreat following her divorce from Trevor Engelson. Reports of her traveling under aliases. A rarely seen, near-anonymous trip to Patagonia. Everything suddenly demanded a second look. But for those close to Meghan, including friends who once swore by her integrity, this wasn't just another royal scandal. This was personal. One longtime friend from Toronto, speaking under anonymity, reportedly confessed that Meghan had once broken down in tears, cryptically referencing children the world will never know. At the time, it was dismissed as a metaphor for sacrifice. Now, it seemed disturbingly literal. And yet, the story becomes even more convoluted when you add Prince Harry to the picture. Because if Meghan had indeed hidden the existence of twin sons, born out of wedlock to another man, the real question isn't just how she managed to hide it, it's whether Harry ever knew. Insiders claim that Harry has always been fiercely protective of his privacy, especially regarding their children, Archie and Lilibet. But what if he was protecting more than just his family's safety? What if he was shielding secrets he never fully understood himself? Or worse, secrets that were deliberately kept from him? A source close to royal security allegedly confirmed that several locations Meghan requested private protection for during her pregnancy years had no visible connection to either Archie or Lilibet's development. One such location? A quiet Argentinian villa, nestled near a vineyard in the Mendoza region, about 400 miles from Córdoba. It all starts to feel like a puzzle assembled backward. One missing piece leads to another, then another, until a disturbing picture begins to form. A woman with a carefully curated image, a past lover with alleged evidence, a royal marriage built on trust that may have been cracked from the start, and children, innocent, unseen, and possibly forgotten, living far from the media's gaze. But the question everyone is now asking isn't just about the timeline or the logistics. It's about intent. Why? Why would someone go to such lengths to conceal the birth of two children? Why the need for aliases, distant clinics, and forged documents? Was it shame? Fear? A calculated career move? Or was it something darker? As we dive into this story, we will trace the threads that have now wrapped themselves around the very heart of the British monarchy. We'll hear from medical professionals in Argentina, analyze leaked emails and documents, and explore the tangled personal history that connects Meghan Markle to a man who now threatens to bring it all crashing down. This isn't a story about royal drama. This is a story about betrayal, abandonment, and the lengths to which someone will go to reshape their identity in pursuit of power. It's about a mother, a lover, and a duchess, all in one, and the truth she may have buried beneath layers of reinvention. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? What happens when love, politics, and secrets collide in the public eye? Most importantly, what happens next? Stay with us, because by the time we're done, the way you view Meghan Markle may never be the same again. This is the story of Joe Giuliano's final stand, of twin boys who vanished before they were ever seen, and of a royal illusion that may now be on the brink of collapse. For years, Meghan Markle had been a symbol of reinvention. She went from television actress to British royalty in what felt like the blink of an eye. For many, she was the modern fairy tale come to life, a biracial American woman who defied centuries-old traditions and married a prince. But behind the glitz, the tabloid wars, and the palace drama, there was always a lingering question. Something about her story never quite added up. A chapter felt missing. And as more eyes now look backward in search of truth, one period of her life stands out like a fogged mirror refusing to clear. It was a time just after the collapse of her first marriage, when she disappeared from public view. No film roles, no red carpets, no sightings. The world thought she was just regrouping, the way many people do after divorce. A brief break, a private reset, perhaps a personal retreat. But according to new claims and damning suggestions now coming to light, that vanishing act may have been much more deliberate, and hiding much more than emotional recovery. It begins with a series of travel documents, now in the hands of independent journalists and investigators, showing that Meghan Markle, under a pseudonym, flew from Toronto to Buenos Aires in early 2009. From there, she journeyed into Argentina's interior, arriving in Córdoba, a bustling but less paparazzi-heavy city in the heart of the country. What was initially presented to friends as a volunteer trip to help teach English in a remote area soon raises eyebrows when matched against private clinic records obtained from a source within the local government's health department. The dates align almost too perfectly. Meghan arrives in January. She is seen by local medical staff in February. And in March, a woman matching her exact profile is checked into a private maternity wing under an alias. The records don't say Meghan Markle, but the birth certificate issued 2 weeks later lists a mother with nearly identical details: nationality, age, height, and, eerily, a similar middle name that Meghan reportedly used in school, Rachel. The child, or rather, children, because this birth certificate notes twins, were registered as unnamed males. No father is listed. No follow-up visit was recorded. Within 48 hours of the birth, both the mother and children disappeared from the system. No discharge summary. No transfer to another clinic. No record of vaccinations. Just gone. To understand how such a clean break was possible, you must understand Argentina at the time. In the late 2000s, certain private clinics operated in the shadows, offering high-profile or discreet clients absolute privacy for a price. A nurse who worked at the clinic in question, speaking under condition of anonymity, described a woman who spoke softly but firmly and had an air of importance. The woman was kept away from other patients, visited only by a single man, believed to be the father. He was described as European-looking, with olive skin, and never gave his name. That same man, many now believe, is the one who would later be revealed by Joe Giuliano as the true father of Meghan's alleged fourth child, or in this case, children. And though his identity remains officially unconfirmed, several investigators have traced Meghan's movements to a vineyard estate on the outskirts of Mendoza, owned by a businessman who has since vanished from public life. What makes this story even more bizarre is how meticulously this entire chapter of her life was erased. Friends in Toronto who once spoke casually about Meghan's travels in South America now claim they don't recall the details. Some flat out deny she ever left North America. But digital footprints tell a different story. Old airline manifests, security logs at international hotels, a single photo, blurred and poorly lit, showing a woman who looks remarkably like Meghan walking with two security personnel through the arrivals terminal at Ministro Pistarini International Airport. All these clues lay dormant for years, invisible beneath the glow of her rise to royalty. Who would question a woman so poised, so seemingly polished, with such a tightly managed public image? And yet, sometimes secrets don't stay buried. They tremble, quietly, beneath the surface of a perfectly curated life, waiting for just the right moment, or person, to bring them to light. Joe Giuliano claims to have been that person from the very beginning. According to him, Meghan didn't just confide in him about the pregnancy. She was, in his words, desperate, terrified, and unsure what to do. In a private email he allegedly saved, Meghan wrote about feeling cornered by fate and fearing that a child would end everything. She never referenced the man in Argentina directly, but she spoke of a connection that couldn't exist in the life she dreamed of. She asked him not to judge her, and she asked him to forget. Joe says he tried, but forgetting isn't easy when the truth weighs more than silence. He tells a story of long nights, hushed phone calls, and cryptic messages. He says Meghan sent him updates for weeks after the birth, then abruptly cut contact. She told him she had taken care of it and was moving on. She began pursuing acting roles with a new intensity. A friend of hers at the time remembers Meghan saying she wanted to be someone no one could look down on. It was as if she had buried a part of herself, or two parts, and thrown away the map. But the past has a strange way of catching up. In the years that followed, Meghan's fame ballooned, first through Suits, then through her romance with Prince Harry. The higher she rose, the more untouchable she became. Journalists digging into her history would hit walls, sealed records, deleted social media accounts, uncooperative former acquaintances. The story had been locked away, placed under virtual glass. Untouchable. Until now. It took a single decision, one interview, for that glass to shatter. Joe says he waited for the right time, that he didn't want to destroy her, that he still remembers the woman he once loved. But when he saw her on international stages, advocating for transparency, women's rights, and speaking of motherhood with what he calls a carefully managed tone, something broke inside him. He says he remembered those twins. He remembered the crying on the phone. He remembered the fear in her voice when she said, "They can never know." It wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a lie. And in Joe's eyes, that lie was now doing harm. Not just to Harry, not just to the monarchy, but to the children who may have never been acknowledged at all. Some will ask, why now? Why would Joe wait so long to speak? Is this revenge? Desperation? A cash grab? Those are fair questions, and the next chapters of this story may explore his motives. But one thing is clear. The shadow Meghan left in Argentina is no longer hiding. As we move forward, we'll trace Joe's explosive evidence, the identity of the man he claims fathered the twins, and the subtle clues Meghan may have left behind. in interviews, in diaries, and even in the names she chose for Archie and Lilibut. Was it all a cover? Was the royal fairy tale just a mask for a past too dangerous to acknowledge? The shadow is long, but the truth may be even darker. For over a decade, the name Joe Giuliano had been little more than a ghost in Meghan Markle's past. Whispers of their engagement were rarely addressed and quickly dismissed. Those few who remembered his face from early social media days or vague tabloid mentions often assumed he was just another boyfriend on her way up the Hollywood ladder. But he was much more than that. He wasn't just a man Meghan dated. According to new claims, he was the man she nearly married. The man who knew the version of Meghan long before tiaras and titles. And perhaps most importantly, the man who held the key to a past she spent years trying to erase. His reemergence wasn't planned in a grand Hollywood sense. There was no red carpet, no trailer announcement, no social media campaign. It came quietly, then loudly, like a storm first whispering through the trees before cracking open the sky. Joe Giuliano stepped back into the public spotlight with the caution of someone who knew the weight of the story he was about to tell. It began with a leak. Weeks before his explosive interview with Seth Meyers, anonymous online users began circulating rumors of a former fiancé planning to go public with shocking allegations about Meghan Markle's secret past. At first, the rumors were dismissed. The internet is full of conspiracies. But then, a series of curious coincidences started surfacing. Old pictures, once believed to be scrubbed, reappeared on obscure blogs. A grainy snapshot of Meghan and Joe in a Los Angeles cafe in 2006. A handwritten note allegedly penned by Meghan, signed Forever, R. And a photo of what looked like an engagement ring sitting on a kitchen counter, beside a plane ticket to Buenos Aires dated 2009. Journalists began to dig. Who was Joe Giuliano? Why did his name keep popping up in obscure corners of online forums dedicated to royal scandals? A few determined reporters managed to track down public records confirming that Meghan and Joe had indeed applied for a marriage license in California, but it was never finalized. The records showed it was withdrawn shortly after Meghan returned from her mysterious trip to Argentina. At the same time, whispers began emerging from within the entertainment industry. A former casting agent claimed Joe used to accompany Meghan to early audition calls. A friend of the couple said Joe was head over heels and that they talked about babies and vineyards in the future. Another said their breakup was sudden, violent only in its silence. One day, they were planning a wedding. The next, he was gone. So where had he been all these years? Joe Giuliano disappeared from the public eye just as Meghan's star began to rise. He deleted his Facebook. He left Los Angeles. Some say he moved back to the East Coast. Others claim he was paid off to keep quiet. Joe has never confirmed either. But in his first sit-down interview in over a decade, he shared something no one expected: remorse. He didn't come out swinging. He didn't appear gleeful or vengeful. In fact, he seemed tired, worn down, like someone who'd carried a heavy truth for far too long and finally decided it was time to put it down. He began by acknowledging the obvious. Yes, he and Meghan were engaged. Yes, he loved her. He spoke about how intelligent she was, how driven, how focused. But he also talked about how tightly she guarded her image, even then. How even in private moments, she'd rehearse how she might be perceived. How she once told him, "My past is my past. It won't matter once I write my own story." Joe said he tried to support her dreams. But something changed after her trip to Argentina. When she returned, she was distant, distracted. She barely looked him in the eye. One night, he found her crying alone in the kitchen. He asked what was wrong. She said nothing, just tired. But then, in a moment of vulnerability, she allegedly told him the words that would haunt him for years. "They exist," she whispered. "But they were never supposed to." He pressed her, but she shut down. The next morning, she told him it was over. No explanation. No fight. Just done. Within weeks, she moved out. A mutual friend said Meghan refused to speak about him ever again. "Joe who?" she once replied when asked by an old college classmate. But Joe didn't move on so easily. He says he held on to pieces of her, not out of resentment, but confusion. He wanted to understand. He wanted closure. He kept emails, voicemails, postcards. He kept that plane ticket to Argentina. And most importantly, he kept the memory of that kitchen conversation, the night she hinted at something too painful, too risky to name. Over the years, as Meghan transformed into royalty, Joe stayed silent. He says he respected her journey. He wanted her to succeed. He even watched the royal wedding, sipping wine in his small Brooklyn apartment and feeling proud. But when the headlines shifted, when accusations of lies, manipulation, and toxic ambition began to follow her, he started to question everything. Then came the CH. When Meghan and Harry announced the birth of Archie, Joe felt uneasy. He didn't understand why, but something felt wrong. It wasn't the joy of new life. It was the language, the wording. He noticed how guarded Meghan became whenever her motherhood was discussed. He noticed the lack of visible pregnancy signs in early public photos. And, like many, he noticed the inconsistencies in birth records, hospital visits, and timelines. Joe began to ask himself a terrifying question. Was this the same Meghan who once whispered about children who were never supposed to exist? That question consumed him. He claims he began reaching out to old contacts in Argentina. Some were dead ends. Some were hostile. But a few remembered. One nurse, after seeing Meghan on a magazine cover, allegedly said, "She was here once. But she wasn't a princess then." That sentence was enough to send Joe down a path that would lead him to records, photos, and testimonies. Piece by piece, he began assembling the puzzle. But he didn't go public. Not yet. For months, he debated it. He knew the risks. He knew the backlash he'd face. People would call him bitter, a liar, a man looking for attention. But he also believed that silence had a cost. He began to feel responsible. Not to Meghan, not even to the public, but to the children, the alleged twins born in Argentina who had no voice, no identity, and no place in the world's version of their mother's life. That's when he made the decision. Joe contacted a media producer he trusted. They crafted a plan to get his story out, not through a gossip blog or sensational tabloid, but through a platform that couldn't be dismissed so easily. That led them to Seth Meyers' team, who initially refused, fearing the legal minefield. But after reviewing some of Joe's evidence, photos, travel logs, and clinic documents, the show agreed. With careful scripting and legal vetting, they booked him for a discreet appearance. But the moment wasn't discreet. It exploded. The minute Joe opened his mouth and said the words, "There are children Meghan never wanted the world to know about," everything changed. The studio audience froze. Seth looked stunned. And backstage, according to crew leaks, Meghan Markle, who had allegedly arranged a surprise appearance to promote her upcoming brand relaunch, had what can only be described as a complete breakdown. Staff members report seeing her pacing, visibly shaken, speaking frantically on the phone before disappearing into a black SUV waiting behind the studio lot. Joe had spoken. The genie was out. Since then, his name has dominated headlines. Interviews, talk shows, podcasts. Some paint him as a hero, others as a scorned ex seeking vengeance. Joe has remained mostly reserved, speaking only when necessary. He says he's not here for fame. He's here for truth. And that truth, as we'll uncover in the next chapter, leads directly to a man in Argentina, a forgotten vineyard, and the one link that might finally confirm everything. The truth, as uncomfortable as it may be, always has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it is buried or how much power is used to conceal it. Joe Giuliano's explosive reappearance and the bombshell he dropped may have broken the silence, but it was the man in Argentina who gave that truth its human face. And when the light was finally cast on him, the darkness surrounding Meghan Markle's hidden past began to unravel with alarming speed. His name, for now, remains unconfirmed in official records, but those who have investigated the events surrounding Meghan's mysterious trip to South America in 2009 have narrowed down his identity to one man, Esteban Villarreal. A former wine exporter and minor celebrity within Argentine tourism circles, Esteban was known for his striking looks, his easy charm, and his quiet disappearance from public life just as Meghan's began to rise. For years, Esteban operated a small but luxurious vineyard estate on the outskirts of Mendoza, nestled between mountain ridges and surrounded by olive groves. It was a retreat for wealthy foreigners and discreet travelers, the kind of place where deals were made, affairs were kept quiet, and secrets often died without ever being spoken aloud. Locals remember him fondly, an educated man fluent in English, soft-spoken, and a romantic at heart. But by 2010, he was gone. The vineyard was sold. His social media accounts vanished. He became, like Meghan's past, a ghost. But the name resurfaced when Joe Giuliano began connecting the dots between Meghan's Argentina journey and the birth of 2 children at a private clinic in Córdoba. Through former employees, archived online material, and even leaked Airbnb records, Joe traced Meghan's 2009 travel route straight to Esteban's doorstep. He wasn't the only one. Investigative journalists, now emboldened by Joe's televised allegations, flew to Mendoza to track down anyone who had contact with Esteban during that time. What they uncovered was a chilling series of coincidences. One housekeeper, now retired, recalled an American actress visiting the estate that year. She remembered how secretive it all felt: the private doctor visits, the whispering at night, the boxes of baby supplies delivered, only to be hidden away in closets. Another former employee described seeing the couple, Meghan and Esteban, walking through the vineyard at sunset, holding hands, speaking in a mix of Spanish and English. They were close, she said, but she cried a lot. She seemed afraid, like she was running from something. So who was Esteban to Meghan? Those who knew him say he wasn't the typical fling. They described their relationship as intense, emotionally charged, and undeniably physical. Esteban himself, in a now-deleted blog post from 2010, wrote cryptically about a woman with fire in her eyes and ice in her soul, who left as quickly as she came, but stayed longer in memory than most lovers ever do. Many now believe this was Meghan. There's also the issue of the children. According to leaked clinic documents, the mother who gave birth to the twin boys listed a Villarreal as an emergency contact. The signature is partial, the ink smudged, but it's there. And while the hospital refuses to publicly comment on patients, multiple former staff members insist that Esteban was seen at the facility during the time of the birth, delivering meals, signing for documents, and pacing nervously outside the delivery room. Yet the most damning evidence may not come from Argentina, but from the digital breadcrumbs left behind. A photo surfaced, pulled from a now-defunct travel blog run by an American tourist who visited the vineyard in April 2009. In the background, seated beneath a terrace umbrella, is a woman who looks unmistakably like Meghan Markle. She's dressed in casual clothes, holding a glass of red wine, her other hand resting protectively on her belly. Beside her sits a man with dark hair and olive-toned skin, presumed to be Esteban. While this alone doesn't prove parenthood, it aligns with everything Joe Giuliano described: Meghan's trip, her pregnancy, and the efforts to bury that chapter before it could ever come to light. So why did Esteban disappear? Some believe he was paid to remain silent. A large transfer of funds, traced through leaked banking information, shows a significant deposit made into a Mendoza-based account in 2011, originating from an American legal firm known to have ties to Hollywood clientele. The timing coincides with Meghan's return to television success and her re-entry into the public spotlight. Others suggest Esteban left voluntarily, that after being denied the right to raise his own children, he withdrew from the world that had momentarily accepted him, broken him, and cast him aside. The vineyard, once a thriving business, now sits abandoned, its gates rusted, its vines overgrown. Local rumors vary. Some say Esteban lives in Europe now, under a different name. Others claim he took the twins and raised them himself, far from the reach of media and scandal. There are even whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that Meghan receives annual photographs from an anonymous sender, always arriving in unmarked envelopes. Pictures of 2 boys, smiling, growing, living in the shadows of a truth never spoken. The tragedy here is layered. If Esteban Villarreal truly fathered twin boys with Meghan Markle, then those children have been denied not only the public acknowledgement of their existence, but also the right to know their own heritage. Raised in secrecy, disconnected from both their parents, reduced to whispers and scandal rather than voices in life. And Meghan, whether out of fear, shame, ambition, or survival, chose to sever that part of her story. She chose a new path, a new man, a royal title, a life where those boys didn't fit the narrative. But can you ever truly abandon something that shares your blood? There's no public statement from Esteban, no interview, no photograph that confirms his current whereabouts. But his silence speaks volumes. It echoes louder with every detail uncovered. Every flight record. Every memory from a vineyard worker. Every smudged signature. The truth doesn't vanish. It lingers, like the last glass of Malbec on a table no one's returned to in years. And for Meghan, that lingering truth may be the one storm even palace walls can't protect her from. This man in Argentina, once just a footnote in her private life, is now center stage in a scandal that threatens to redefine how the world views not only her, but everything she has built. And what about the twins? Are they safe? Are they happy? Do they know who their mother is? Do they look like her? Do they ever ask why they have no baby pictures with her, no stories about the day they were born, no trace of her presence beyond a name that exists only in secret? These questions haunt this story more than the headlines. Because behind the drama and the politics and the betrayal is a human story. Of children who deserve answers. Of a father who vanished. Of a mother who chose silence. The man in Argentina isn't just part of Meghan Markle's past. He may very well be the beginning of her most guarded truth. And if his story ever comes fully to light, in documents, in DNA, in testimony, then the world will finally see not just a duchess, not just a celebrity, but a woman who made decisions that echo far beyond fame. There's something haunting about a child whose existence is shrouded in secrecy. But when that secrecy spans continents, involves multiple identities, erased documents, and powerful people, it becomes more than tragic. It becomes deliberate, chilling, a living contradiction. And that is precisely what now surrounds the alleged twin boys born to Meghan Markle in Argentina. The twins Joe Giuliano has courageously brought to light, and whom the world may have unknowingly crossed paths with, without ever realizing their connection. They are, by all accounts, ghosts hiding in plain sight. The first known reference to the boys surfaced not in a hospital record or a birth announcement, but in a blurry photo taken in a small mountain village just north of Córdoba. A German tourist, documenting his road trip across Argentina in early 2010, snapped what he believed was an ordinary family walking out of a church. A woman in her early 20s, a tall man holding the hands of two toddlers, twin boys dressed in matching sweaters, one navy, the other gray. The photo sat forgotten on a travel blog for years. That is, until a researcher investigating Joe Giuliano's claims came across it, nearly a decade later. The resemblance was striking, not just in the features of the boys, both of whom bore a clear likeness to Meghan's youthful photos, but in the timing. The picture was taken less than a year after Meghan's documented presence in Argentina, and it aligned perfectly with the birth window of the alleged twins. But it was what came next that stunned even seasoned investigators. The man in the photo, long believed to be a local farmer, was identified as Esteban Villarreal. His appearance had changed slightly, a fuller beard, heavier build. But facial recognition technology confirmed the match with over 93% certainty. The woman with him wasn't Meghan. That much was clear. But she appeared to be a caretaker, possibly hired or entrusted to help raise the boys discreetly away from any prying eyes. Following the trail, researchers discovered that Esteban had, for a brief period in 2011, enrolled two children in a local private daycare under the names Mateo and Iker. Their surnames were never listed. All identification provided was signed under a pseudonym. But one teacher, speaking anonymously, remembered them well. They were sweet boys, she said. Always quiet. Very observant. They looked like twins, but their personalities were very different. One was bold, the other shy. And they had a habit. Every time someone took out a camera, they would look away. Every single time. That strange behavior, avoidance of cameras, struck the teacher as unusual. She assumed it was something the parents taught them. A safety measure. But now, in light of the growing revelations, it paints a more calculated picture. These children were being hidden, trained to disappear even when present. What's more, the school records for Mateo and Iker were suddenly withdrawn after only a few months. The stated reason? Relocation. But no forwarding address was ever given. Their documents vanished. Their names didn't appear on any subsequent school lists in the region. Some locals say they were taken to Chile. Others believe they were flown to Spain. One unconfirmed report even suggests a nanny was hired from the UK and that she escorted the children out of Argentina under diplomatic escort. No records support that. But the speculation is rooted in an unsettling pattern. Every time someone gets close to these twins, they vanish again. Not because they're lost, but because someone is working very hard to keep them that way. There's another layer of evidence that adds weight to the theory: drawings. In 2019, an art collector in Barcelona hosted a charity exhibition featuring works from children in shelters and homes across South America. Two unsigned drawings caught his eye. They were different from the rest. Cleaner, more detailed, mature beyond the supposed age of the artists. One depicted a house by a mountain with two stick figures and a woman standing far away, her face drawn without eyes. The second showed two boys holding hands, standing between the words, "We came from the stars, but we don't belong." The collector was so moved by the pieces that he inquired about their origins. The only information given was that the boys had submitted the art through a private donor from Mendoza. Their names, once again, were Mateo and Iker. If the connection is real, then Meghan Markle's alleged twins are not only alive and well, they are aware of their difference, perhaps even of their invisibility, and that carries with it a weight no child should ever be made to bear. Meanwhile, in California, Meghan has continued to portray herself as a devoted mother to Archie and Lilibet. Public appearances are crafted with care. Photo shoots are controlled. Interviews speak of growth, motherhood, and resilience. And yet, not once has she acknowledged the possibility of other children. No slip-ups, no veiled references, not a single accidental mention that could raise suspicion. Some argue this is proof the story isn't real, that if such children existed, Meghan couldn't possibly hide them so thoroughly. But others, those who have studied her career and public relations mastery, believe the very perfection of the cover is what makes it all the more likely. Meghan's image has been built on reinvention, on escape, on the ability to rewrite her narrative whenever necessary. If any public figure were capable of burying the past so completely, it would be her. The psychological toll, however, may be harder to hide. Body language experts reviewing recent footage of Meghan suggest moments of unguarded discomfort when motherhood is discussed in interviews. Slight hesitations, changes in breathing, micro-expressions that suggest suppressed emotion or cognitive dissonance. In one specific moment, during an interview promoting her podcast, Meghan is asked whether she always dreamed of being a mother. She pauses, looks off-camera for a fraction of a second, then responds with a vague, "It's been a journey. A very layered one." Was that a hint? A slip? Or a calculated vagueness designed to protect something too personal to name? What complicates matters further is the increasingly vocal support for Joe Giuliano. After his interview, several former acquaintances of Meghan from her pre-royal days have stepped forward anonymously to corroborate parts of his story. One former friend said Meghan once described a chapter of her life she wished she could erase. Another recalled a tearful conversation in which Meghan confessed to making the hardest decision any woman could make and carrying the weight of it every day. If the twins exist, they were not discarded. That much seems clear from Joe's testimony. Meghan may have distanced herself, but the decision was, according to him, filled with guilt and conflict. He even suggests that Meghan continued to track their well-being through trusted intermediaries, receiving photos and updates without ever making direct contact. And yet, for the world watching, for the monarchy, the press, and even her own husband, those twins remain invisible. They are the unspoken truth, the unknown heirs, the boys who could rewrite everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle. There is one final, disturbing detail worth mentioning, something unearthed only recently and still under investigation by international journalists. A passport application filed in 2015 in Buenos Aires for two boys under the age of 7. The Guardian listed is anonymous, but the form includes a photo attachment. That attachment, never made public, was described by a consulate insider as two boys who could be royal doubles. The passport request was denied. No reason was given. But what's chilling is this: the request was flagged, not by immigration, but by a private UK intelligence consultant who allegedly warned British officials that the identity of the twins could pose long-term reputational complications. That flag has now become a beacon. Journalists are on the hunt. Royal watchers are combing through photos. And social media is ablaze with speculation. But through it all, the twins remain where they always have, in the shadows, hidden in plain sight. The British monarchy has endured countless scandals, affairs, divorces, abdications, and public embarrassments splashed across newspapers for generations. But what made the fallout from Joe Giuliano's revelation so uniquely dangerous was not the scandal itself, but the uncertainty that followed it. Not knowing whether the allegations were entirely true, partially true, or a malicious fabrication left the palace in a state of unprecedented vulnerability. For once, they were not in control of the narrative. And when the monarchy is exposed to chaos it didn't orchestrate, panic becomes inevitable. The moment Joe's interview aired and began trending worldwide, the phones at Buckingham Palace didn't just ring, they lit up like wildfire. Royal aides, press secretaries, and senior advisors were immediately summoned to crisis meetings. It was just after 6 a.m. in London when the first alert reached the Queen's private secretary. By 6:15, internal emails were firing between departments marked urgent, U.S. broadcast fallout. The gravity of the situation wasn't even fully understood yet, but the words Meghan, twins, Argentina, and former fiancé appearing in the same sentence triggered every emergency response protocol built for media disasters. And this wasn't just tabloid fodder. This was different. Joe Giuliano wasn't an anonymous source. He was verifiable. The evidence he had referenced in his live interview was, at least on the surface, credible. Medical records, travel logs, eyewitnesses. It wasn't a rumor. They were looking at a potential royal disaster in real time, spreading across social media, news outlets, and political forums faster than any previous crisis. The Queen had passed on, but her legacy, her carefully maintained institution, was still in the hands of King Charles, who by all accounts, had already grown weary of Meghan's persistent drama. For Charles, this wasn't just another scandal to smooth over. It was a fundamental threat to the image of the monarchy, one rooted in deceit, identity, and the very bloodline of the crown. At 8:05 a.m., King Charles held an emergency briefing with his inner circle. Present were Prince William, Princess Anne, and two of the monarchy's most seasoned crisis advisors. Missing from the table was Prince Harry, deliberately, according to sources. It wasn't just a matter of protocol. It was about containment. If the allegations about Meghan's hidden children were even partially true, it would raise existential questions about Archie and Lilibet's legitimacy, their place in the line of succession, and the credibility of Harry himself. And what if Harry didn't know? That question loomed larger than any other. The idea that Prince Harry, the king's own son, might have been kept in the dark about the woman he married and the family she may have hidden from him was too volatile to ignore. If it was true, the implications were explosive. If it wasn't, then it meant Harry may have knowingly concealed the existence of two children from the monarchy and the world. Neither scenario boded well. Inside palace walls, discussions turned quickly from disbelief to damage control. One royal aide, who later leaked part of the internal memo to the foreign press, said the mood was like wartime. Every movement of Meghan and Harry was being tracked. Every prior interview Meghan had given was being reviewed for possible contradictions. Legal teams were consulted. Public statements were drafted and scrapped. But by noon, a decision was made. The palace would not issue a public response. The reasoning was simple. Denial gives the story power, and silence gives the palace plausible deniability. But within private chambers, things were far from silent. Prince William, according to insiders, was livid, not just at Meghan, but at his brother. If Harry had truly married a woman hiding two sons with another man, the royal family had not just been blindsided, they had been made into fools. Sources claimed William paced furiously during the briefing, questioning the vetting process that had once assured them Meghan had no children, no previous public scandals, no unresolved legal issues. He allegedly snapped at one point, saying, "How could we be this blind again? Haven't we learned from Andrew?" The room went cold. The parallel was not welcome, but the truth lingered. Another royal embroiled in a secret, with the institution scrambling in the aftermath. Princess Anne, on the other hand, reportedly responded with ice rather than fire. Calm, calculating, she requested intelligence from MI5 regarding Meghan's travel history between 2008 and 2011. Specifically, She wanted to know if any covert security details had ever accompanied her during unverified international trips, particularly to South America. Why am I 5? Because if Meghan had managed to slip away under the radar, someone had helped her. And if royal resources had been unknowingly used to cover up those movements, then the palace had more than a public relations crisis. They had a scandal of corruption. But the most heartbreaking piece of the panic was, undeniably, King Charles himself. For a monarch who had only recently ascended to the throne, Charles had already weathered more than his fair share of public storms. But this was different. This was personal. He had believed Meghan was a fresh start for the family, a sign of modernity, of diversity, of progress. Even after the Oprah interview, even after the titles were dropped, he had clung to a sense of familial duty. Meghan, he thought, was simply misunderstood. Perhaps difficult, perhaps self-serving, but not malicious. But now, facing the possibility that she had hidden 2 sons from the world, sons who could potentially carry some claim to royal lineage depending on legal interpretations, Charles reportedly said in private, "She deceived all of us. She brought shame, not reform." According to insiders, he gave a single instruction to his legal team: find the truth. Quietly, thoroughly, relentlessly. Behind the scenes, investigators were dispatched not just to dig into Meghan's past, but to verify the legitimacy of every document relating to Archie and Lilibet. Was the hospital information accurate? Were the doctors verified? Were the birth certificates formally recognized under British and Californian law? And most disturbingly, was there DNA evidence? At this point, questions of surrogacy that had once been considered tasteless gossip were back on the table with renewed urgency. Meghan's children, if born of another woman or acquired through non-traditional channels without proper transparency, could open a can of constitutional worms the palace was not prepared to manage. And if there were other children, older, born of her own body, in another country, what then? Would they have any rights? Any claims? The monarchy had never faced such a possibility. The idea that 2 boys, living anonymously somewhere in Argentina or elsewhere, could one day rise to claim royal connection, or worse, be used by the media or political enemies as leverage, terrified everyone in the room. And it didn't stop with internal panic. Government channels were alerted. Parliament members were quietly briefed. International diplomatic advisors were consulted to determine whether Argentina had any legal obligations to cooperate if an inquiry or DNA verification was ever pursued. Lawyers debated questions that had never been asked before. If Meghan Markle gave birth before her royal marriage, does it fall under palace jurisdiction? Can the crown be held responsible for actions she took as a private citizen? If those twins are indeed hers, can their citizenship be used as grounds for future legal battles? And what about the media? The British press, often criticized for their relentless coverage of Meghan, now found themselves strangely subdued. Not because they lacked appetite, but because palace pressure had already begun to mount behind closed doors. Editors received phone calls. Publicists were warned. Leaks were monitored. Any reference to the twins was to be handled with extreme caution, if at all. But not everyone played along. Independent journalists, especially those abroad, began investigating. Argentine outlets interviewed locals. American YouTubers produced deep-dive exposés. Reddit threads exploded with theories. TikTok creators compared photos of Archie and the alleged twins, highlighting differences and pushing for forensic analysis. The genie was out, and the palace could no longer control the narrative, only brace for where it might go. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry, thousands of miles away in Montecito, remained silent. Publicly, at least. Privately, reports suggested turmoil. Meghan was said to be devastated, on the phone with lawyers around the clock, sobbing and furious that Joe Giuliano had shattered the carefully crafted narrative she'd spent years constructing. Harry, according to a former staffer, was more distant, less angry, more shaken, because if Joe wasn't lying, then what else had Meghan not told him? For now, the palace maintains its silence. But inside those regal halls, the panic has not subsided. It festers. It strategizes. It waits. Because even if they do manage to discredit Joe, bury the twins, and suppress the headlines, truth has already slipped through the cracks. And the palace knows one terrifying reality above all others. Truth always finds a way back to the throne. In every public appearance, Meghan Markle has maintained a careful image, measured, eloquent, composed. Whether she's sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, addressing a panel of women entrepreneurs, or walking into a courtroom with carefully chosen grace, Meghan has always presented herself as someone in control. The narrative was hers. Always. Until now. When Joe Giuliano's revelations exploded onto the global stage and the palace scrambled behind the scenes, something unexpected entered the picture. Not a photo, not a leaked document from the clinic, but something far more intimate. A collection of handwritten notes. Personal reflections, fragments of private thoughts, that would become known as the leaked diary. They weren't pages torn from a traditional leather-bound journal. They were scattered entries, loose papers, torn corners of notebooks, fragments of receipts scribbled on in haste, entries typed into an old iPhone note app and later transcribed. Collected over a span of 3 years, these pieces were allegedly discovered by a former friend and confidant of Meghan's from her early Toronto days, someone who claimed to have once shared an apartment with her briefly during a transitional period. This friend, whose identity remains hidden for legal protection, had kept the notes hidden for over a decade. According to her, Meghan entrusted them to her during a period of emotional breakdown. She didn't call it a diary, the woman explained to reporters. She said they were just thoughts, things I need to let out before they rot me from the inside. Until recently, the woman had no intention of revealing them. But when Joe's claims went viral and names like Esteban Villarreal and Mendoza re-entered the public conversation, she knew instantly that those thoughts held more meaning than anyone could have guessed. With trembling hands, she brought the pages to a private media contact in Vancouver, and from there, copies found their way to investigative journalists, legal experts, and inevitably, the palace itself. The entries were raw, fragmented, poetic in places, disturbed in others. There were recurring symbols, references to mountains, red wine, sunflowers, and the stars. But beneath the imagery lay something much darker, a confession of motherhood wrapped in guilt, confusion, and strategic silence. One entry dated February 3, 2009, reads, "They say some decisions free you, but this one cages me. 2 heartbeats, 2 sparks, and I never even told my own mother. I want to scream it, but the silence is safer. The world isn't kind to women with inconvenient children." Another, written just days later, is more direct. He asked if I was sure. How do you answer that? When your career is just finding light. When your phone has finally started ringing for the right reasons. You don't say no. You say nothing. You just carry it, like contraband in your soul. And then, in what many now consider the most damning line of all, they will never know me, but they will have pieces of me. My nose, my fingers, my habit of staring into the distance when the world gets too loud. I gave them life, but not mine. If these words are authentic, and handwriting analysis suggests they are, then Meghan's own admissions confirm the very thing she has spent years denying through omission. Not only that she bore children before her royal life began, but that she actively chose to keep them hidden, emotionally and publicly. The entries shift in tone over time. Some are steeped in romantic longing, especially in references to the man believed to be Esteban. One passage dated April 2009 reads, "He holds them like glass, so afraid they'll break. I watch from the shadows. I'm a ghost even to myself. But in that moment, I almost believed I could stay. Almost. Others descend into fear and isolation. They're too perfect. I shouldn't have seen them. I shouldn't have stayed. If I don't leave now, I'll never be able to go. And the woman I'm supposed to become will die right here in the Andes with 2 perfect boys and a man who only speaks the truth in silence." Over the years, Meghan's critics have accused her of being calculating, opportunistic, and media-hungry. But these entries tell a more complex story, not of villainy, but of conflict. Of a woman torn between ambition and vulnerability, between love and the crushing weight of expectation, between being who the world wanted her to be and who she truly was. There's one entry from late 2011, dated just weeks before Meghan was cast in Suits, that reveals a chilling self-awareness. "This role might be the door I've been praying for. But if it opens, I have to leave that other life behind forever. Esteban doesn't understand. He thinks love is enough. But I know the truth. In this world, love is a luxury. Image is everything. Secrets are survival. It's not difficult to read between the lines. Meghan saw her rise in Hollywood as conditional, not just on talent, but on narrative. And her narrative couldn't include twin boys born out of wedlock to a man in Argentina. Not when she was striving to be seen, accepted, and eventually chosen. One of the final entries in the collection is dated March 2017, just before she was publicly linked to Prince Harry. In it, she reflects on motherhood with a tone that drips with both nostalgia and terror. I wonder if they remember me, or if I'm just a shadow they once knew. I hope they're happy. I hope they never look for me, because if they do, everything I've built comes crashing down. Perhaps the most humanizing line in all of this is scribbled in the margin of a torn page, possibly during a bout of insomnia or grief. I miss them when I see children laugh. I wonder if they laugh like I used to. These diary entries, raw and unfiltered, have become a kind of emotional X-ray, exposing the internal fracture lines of a woman who has spent years mastering external perfection. They don't excuse what she may have done. They don't justify secrecy or silence. But they do reveal something that had been missing from the public discourse: the why. Why would someone give birth to children and never speak of them again? Why would a woman so often photographed with a radiant smile carry the weight of such sorrow behind her eyes? Why would a duchess, adored by millions, still feel like she had to choose between love and legitimacy? The palace, for their part, has reportedly launched an independent verification of the diary's origin. Handwriting experts in London and New York have compared the notes to Meghan's known samples from fan letters, personal inscriptions, and charity thank you cards. The conclusion, according to one anonymous expert, was damning. It's her. It's unmistakably her. The pressure on the pen, the loops in her L's, the slant when she writes emotionally, it's all consistent. But the authenticity of the diary may not even be the most pressing concern. It's the implications. Because if Meghan Markle willingly gave up public association with two sons, only to later present herself as a new mother, a mother with titles, with prestige, with global attention, then her entire personal brand is called into question. The speeches, the advocacy, the carefully worded press statements about family and resilience and being a mother of two, all of it collapses under the weight of omission. And what about Prince Harry? Did he know about the diary? Did he read her past in those scribbled margins before proposing to her? Or was he, like the rest of the world, kept in the dark, manipulated by someone whose life was more fragmented than anyone could have imagined? For now, the leaked diary exists in legal limbo. Its contents have not been officially published in their entirety, and Meghan's legal team has already begun issuing cease and desist warnings to outlets who attempt to print full excerpts. But the damage is done. The world has read her words. The pain is there. The truth, whether confessed in secret or screamed aloud, has a pulse now. It breathes. And no amount of palace silence or media redirection can unwrite the ink. The woman who once described herself as just a girl from California trying to make it is now entangled in a story that spans oceans, bloodlines, and broken promises. A story that she wrote, line by line, in her own words. And now, the world is reading. It was the kind of night that television producers dream of: sleek lighting, a lively studio audience, and a guest lineup packed with entertainment and subtle political undertones. Seth Meyers, seasoned, sharp, and known for his ability to balance humor with hard-hitting commentary, was at the top of his game. The taping had begun smoothly. Jokes landed. The crowd laughed. And backstage, producers moved with a confident rhythm, unconcerned by the undercurrent of something far more dramatic about to unfold. But behind the scenes, something was brewing. Meghan Markle was scheduled for a surprise post-show appearance. It wasn't advertised. There had been no promo teasers. It was all hush-hush, a strategic move by her new PR firm meant to reintroduce her to mainstream American audiences with a touch of mystery. Meghan was reportedly in high spirits when she arrived, dressed in a tailored cream blazer and slacks, her hair sleek, her makeup flawless. She waved to backstage crew as she entered through the private entrance, avoiding paparazzi. She believed she was about to control the room. But the room was already turning. Joe Giuliano was the second guest that evening, seated directly after a tech entrepreneur who had demoed a new gadget for the audience. He walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, not the swagger of someone looking for fame, but the measured resolve of a man carrying a burden he had rehearsed for years. He wore a dark gray suit, no tie, and carried a single folder, which he rested on his lap. The crowd didn't know what to expect. Some of them hadn't even heard of him. But they would never forget him. Seth began the segment light, referencing Joe's background and early career as a chef-turned-entrepreneur. Then came the transition, the kind that happens in good television, where the mood shifts like a breath being held. "You've been out of the public eye for a while, Joe," Seth said, narrowing his eyes. "And suddenly, you're here? With a story." Joe smiled, almost sadly. "I didn't come here to get famous," he replied. "I came here to set something straight. Something I've been carrying alone for far too long." At that exact moment, backstage, Meghan Markle stood beside the stage monitor, watching the screen. According to a crew member who later recounted the event to a digital journalist, her expression changed immediately. She had been sipping water, her posture straight, but when Joe began speaking, her shoulders stiffened. She leaned forward, squinting, perhaps thinking, hoping, that the man in front of the camera wasn't who she thought it was. But he was. Joe Giuliano looked into the camera and said the words that stopped the air cold. "I was once engaged to Meghan Markle. We shared a life. We shared everything, including a secret that no one else was supposed to know. She gave birth to twin boys in Argentina in 2009, and she left them behind.